especially as we have colleagues online regarding the protocol for hybrid meetings. So any councillor, lay member or co-optee who is a member of this committee and is going to join remotely must firstly keep their camera on, but make sure it's muted. And of course, my colleagues would know that if they wish to speak, then just raise the virtual hand on the screen. For attendees in the chamber, if you wish to ask a question or comment when invited by myself, then please press your microphone, which will turn green. I'll then invite you to speak one at a time, and please wait until your microphone is turned red before beginning. Every effort will be made to ensure that the questions and comments are asked in order of a hand being raised, but we ask that you recognise the complexities involved when we are monitoring both online and in person. So for you guys here actually in the chamber, it's a physical hand up or pressing the mic and then I'll come to you, okay? Sometimes it's easier to do both just because then I catch you in a glimpse and I can also keep an eye on that monitor as well. I have got my trusty Jane by the side of me, mind, who will give me a nudge if I miss anybody. Okay. If for any reason a member of the committee has cause to leave the meeting, please indicate to me before you leave. Case law is clear. You are not allowed to vote if you haven't heard the full debate. If your screen freezes, then you've heard but you have heard the whole debate. You may use your discretion over whether to vote. However, if you did not, if you did not hear the whole debate, then you cannot vote. Okay, so we're about to start the meeting. So could I ask all officers and guests who would join us remotely to turn off their cameras so that only councillors, lay members or co-opted members are on screen. Thank you. You're asked to turn on your camera when presenting reports or responding to questions. Please turn them back off if your item is finished. Democratic Services will begin a recording. Recording has started. And so, Prynawn da pawb, welcome to this Learning Committee on Monday, the 18th of September. Please note this meeting is being recorded and broadcast by the authority's internet site, and the images and sound recording may also be used for training purposes. So we'll go on to agenda item number 1, apologies received. We've had apologies from our co-opted member, Paul. We've had apologies from our councillor colleague, Jamie, and apologies from Cabinet member Michelle Jones, who's been called into a Cabinet meeting. And that's everybody. Okay. Colleagues, just to remind you then of agenda item number 2, and that is declarations of interest. So I'll ask you all, have you got any declarations of interest to declare? Lawrence.
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. Yeah, just to say that regarding the finance, I'm on the school budget forum. So just to make people aware that I do sit on that and obviously contribute to that forum. Thanks.
Lawrence, thank you for that. That will be noted, and we welcome your contribution here today, being a member of this committee, but also having the insight sitting on that committee as well. So thank you. Okay, I'll move straight on to agenda item number 3 then. That is the school's balances and mid-term financial plans. I think to receive a report on school balances at the end of year and consider reports and consider school mid-term financial plans and budget positions and identify budget pressures to inform future priorities. Now, I appreciate that our Cabinet colleague usually runs through the summary of the report and the recommendations, but our colleague Anthony Lewis, our Sue is going to do it. So I'm going to hand over to Sue, who's going to just take part in this particular item. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members. I'll give the summary and then it'll be over to questions, which I think Anthony will probably be better placed to answer than myself, although we'll probably do a double act at some point, won't we, Anthony? So this report has come to scrutiny. A similar report is going to Council and Cabinet for consideration. I think we are looking at the report shares with scrutiny the school balances from prior to COVID, the current budgets and the projected 3-year mid-term financial plans. It's important to remember that we work a financial year. Although schools run an academic year, the budgets are actually a financial year. So they go from April to March as opposed to September to August, which always seems more reasonable for me for schools, but we obviously work a financial year. Comparative, it is important that members consider the comparative information because it does actually place our schools in context with the rest of schools, with the schools across Wales. And then we actually look at the financial position in the report and the impact of the budget reductions that were applied in 23-24. And we're looking at asking you to note the contents of the report and actually consider implications for the monitoring of school budgets and the prioritising of school funding in the council's budget setting process to enable us to feed this into the report that is due in council shortly.
So thank you ever so much for that. Anthony, can you just bear with me a second, because it was rather remiss of me. For those who joined me in the pre-meeting last week, we did invite and welcome our 3 new members of this committee, and apologies, it was remiss of me. I should have welcomed those officially to the meeting and also let you know who they were. So of course we've got Hannah, we've got Natalie, and we've got Jacob. So you can say a little hello to the rest of the colleagues in the room. They've had training of our colleagues in democratic services, and they took part in the pre-meet last week as well. So welcome, thank you for joining this particular committee. Thank you. Okay, Anthony and Sue, thank you for that, Sue. Colleagues, over to you then for questions, please. Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. Section with the 518, and it says about it is too early to evaluate the impact of the budget, etc. So what I was wondering was, what will be the likely impact, you think, or has been reported by school leaders as a result of that? Impact of the budget reductions.
We're seeing, it depends on each school. I think it's fair to say that each school has been affected differently in the budget cuts for this year. It has affected our own central staff in that a number of schools have chosen to come out of the music service. So we've made redundancies there. And if you actually look at the national music, there is a national music plan. It is one of the priorities for the, for the Welsh government. So there has been a challenge. There is a challenge to us in how we actually deliver that. We're also a couple of schools have pulled out of the attendance education welfare service, which obviously has, schools do get funding for the education welfare service themselves, but it is that additional support that our staff can give. We are seeing impacts on learning support assistance because that's where a number of schools have made redundancies. I think, as it says in the report, it was fixed term contracts and temporary contracts that were finished, but those staff do support some of our most vulnerable children. So, it's too early in the term to see what the actual impact of that has been, because the reductions were made at the end of the summer term, because that's one of the things for members to realise, that while schools have their budget in April, schools will manage the staffing usually for that term, for the summer term. So we don't see a full year impact on budgets until next year. So it is too early to see what the actual impact is, but we are seeing staffing impacts. We are likely to see impact on our ALN provision and how we sort of manage the education welfare service moving forward. We'll wait and see.
No, I was wondering no, what I was wondering is in the actual paragraph, it says, e.g. supporting learners' health and well-being, improving achievement of progress, and the environment for learning and Mars strategy. What has people sort of indicated that would impact those aims generally?
In a report last year, if you remember, we spoke about our education, our ELSAs, emotional literacy support assistants, who support the well-being of some vulnerable children. Now, a number of our schools, those have been made redundant, or those have stopped because those learning support assistants are now doing other things. So if you actually, that means that we know that for a fact, because our educational psychology service offer supervision to those staff, and we know there are not as many staff moving forward. That is a key part not only of the RAS, but actually a key part of our corporate plan, because the second aspiration in our corporate plan is a healthier Merthyr Tydfil, which part of that is your emotional resilience. So as yet, because they were only made redundant, we're not seeing an impact, but we are expecting to see an impact on our statutory services, because obviously that preventative service, which ELSA isn't being put in.
Lawrence.
Yeah. On the next paragraph, 519, it says a further reduction applied to school budgets in 24-25, in addition to the 1.5 million this year. See another significant additional post. Is it not the case that there is anticipated there will be further reductions in the next financial years?
We don't know. Council is yet to determine what the budget will be for next year.
At the moment, then we'd expect it to be equal as to now. Then
I wouldn't like to comment on that, Lawrence, because it is a council decision, it's a cabinet decision, and those conversations haven't started yet. And as you know, they would be brought to schools budget forum anyway. They usually brought, Anthony, around with this time of year, you sort of this in the autumn term. So I can't comment on that yet.
okay, then moving on to
Lawrence, just to support you on that, I think from a council perspective, it may just to add that inevitably it does also focus on what settlement comes from Welsh Government, and then full council and cabinet will make determination and decisions then post that as well. So, you know, we are looking within the next couple of months, and then it goes to council in the new year by March at the latest.
looking at paragraph 6.3. Jumping down there, it says about good resource management in schools as a result of effective leadership and governance and ESTIN. Describe good resources, etc. in that paragraph. So this paragraph indicates the financial management by schools to date isn't good. Therefore, what actions are taking place with schools to improve their effective deployment, staffing and financial resources to support the learning environment?
Sorry, Lawrence, you said then that this suggests that it isn't good.
Yeah.
We've got no recommendations for any of our schools around this aspect. Anthony, do you want to explain why that paragraph is in there?
Yeah, that's a long-standing. We take a report to Cabinet annually to report on the financial position of our schools, the schools' balances, and to seek approval for the financial categorisation of schools. Within that report, we set out our aims and aspirations for our school budgets and our school balances. That includes the benchmark information in 6.2, and we share there the ESTIN definitions around what good resource management looks like. We do have a policy in place which allows us to categorise our schools for financial risk. And as Sue said, we don't have any ESTIN recommendations with respect to any of our schools in terms of poor financial management. The financial categorisation of schools isn't just around the competency of the governing body and the leadership of the school to manage the budget well. It's also around the position that the school finds themselves in with regards to their budget. That position isn't always to do with the competence of those running the school. There can be other external factors that can determine the position of the school's balances and why we come to those judgments. I don't know if that answers Lawrence's question, but that's the reason it's in the report.
Yeah, well, I asked the question was because it's in the section where we want to be, so it intimates that something needs to be done. That's all. Moving on to the next one, then. In fact, it's the next paragraph, 6.4, and it says the key measures of success that the local authority uses to judge good resources in schools are, and it goes on to explain that. But how does these key measures drive the desirable management of resources as quoted in the previous paragraph? Because they don't seem to relate.
I think we're setting out what success looks like for our schools in terms of managing their budgets. And since we've introduced these policies back in 2013, 14, 14, 15, we've had a strong track record of supporting schools to manage their budgets effectively, and sometimes through some very difficult and challenging circumstances. As a result of that, as the context sets out in the introduction and background, when we compare ourselves to other local authorities across Wales, schools in Merthyr have been placed within the top quartile of all performance measures when we look at schools' balances and how they're managed. But the reality of the situation we currently find ourselves in, not just in this local authority, but across Wales, is that we're in a position of significantly decreasing balances and rapidly decreasing balances. And the position across Wales pre-COVID was quite stark. You had 5 local authorities, almost a quarter, had their aggregate schools balances in a deficit budget position. You had a number of local authorities that had their secondary schools in aggregate in a deficit budget position. And I think almost a quarter of all schools in Wales at the time were in a deficit budget position. At the time in Merthyr, we had 7% of our schools in deficit budget. I guess that's 2 of our schools. And currently we don't have any. But during the pandemic, Welsh Government gave significant cash injections to schools over a 2-year period. That's created a position of artificially high balances across Wales that haven't arisen from underspending your core budget. They've arisen from having additional one-off sums of money that you've then got to spend for interventions to support catch-up and to target the impact of the pandemic so that you're able to catch up with those pupils and support standards. So in 6.4, we're just setting out some of the key things that we want to try and ensure we continue to manage as a local authority as we go through this difficult and challenging set of circumstances. Schools will increasingly require a deficit budget, but we want that to be planned. We want schools to let us know, to submit a plan which includes a recovery over a 3 to 4 year period to come back into balance. We'd rather be in that position than having schools with unplanned financial deficits, which suggests more there being poor management. So those 3 bullet points just set out some of those success criteria that we try and ensure is hit every year to ensure we are managing our schools' balances effectively.
Okay, so thank you, Russ. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Sue. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Lawrence. Yeah, Sue, come in.
Can I ask a question back then? That's not for Anthony, for Lawrence.
Yes.
You know that issue now, because this is going to help us. Part of this report is to help us take a report to Cabinet. You're scrutinising it, and we're taking it to Cabinet and Council. You suggest the 6.3 was it rightly is where we want to be now. Should it be there, or should we want to say this is what Eston, but actually I can see what you're saying, Lawrence. It doesn't necessarily fit in there. Would you advise us to actually relook at that and see that it's this is what Eston expect, but actually or make a statement to say none of our school, all our school, we have no, what Anthony said, we have no schools that have a recommendation around poor financial management. It's important to note.
Well, as I say, that's the way I read it. So to me, it's the way I read it. So it did sort of give the wrong impression, and from what you said earlier. Yeah.
We'll look at that when it goes. We'll use that. This is the whole purpose of this meeting, to support us to send a more comprehensive report to Council and Cabinet. So we look at that. Thank you, Lawrence.
Yeah, thank you, Sue. Thank you, Lawrence. Yeah, I think, rephrasing that and then putting that as sort of a highlighted area when you do take that report to Cabinet, I think would be really useful, and take that then from a question from our co-opted member as well. Okay, colleagues, next question. I can't see anybody on my screen. Do you want to press it then, Anna? There we go, Anna, jump in.
Thank you. Oh, it just keeps going off, and I.
Okay, try again. Right, I think, okay, colleagues, I think 1 or 2 of us are in different seats. That's what's happened. So let's just have a quick word with Democratics and see if Anna needs to jump over one. Yeah, can you jump over one? Is that?
I'll just
turn it around towards you then. Yeah, that's lovely.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Just to pick up on some similar sections, actually, just elaborate on point 5.18. So could you clarify when you feel is the appropriate time to evaluate the impact on standards and teaching of these budget reductions? And could I also ask what format will any evaluation take and how will that be communicated to Cabinet and councillors?
There's a report coming to scrutiny later this term, and then there will be, which will be used like this report, and will actually then be taken to council in the new year.
Sorry, can I come in and add to that as well? And another point with regards to the impact, as Sue said, we've had 45 posts that have been removed from our schools, effective from start of September. And so the impact of that will take time, but the impact as well of the £1.5 million funding reductions that have been applied to date, we haven't yet seen the reductions that schools need to apply to their budgets in order to deliver sustainable budgets that have been adjusted for that funding reduction. That hasn't happened yet. That takes a little bit of time to work through the system. So as a result, we have 4 schools currently planning a deficit that have applied to local authority to have that as an approved deficit. And each of those within their plan are identifying additional reductions in posts that are necessary in the next financial year, and in some cases in the following financial year as well, in order to be able to deliver a sustainable budget. Then when you look at beyond those 4 schools, there's an additional 7 schools that are currently indicating being at risk of a deficit in 24-25, and a further 4 in 25-26. So that's a further 11 schools on top of the 4 who've already applied for the deficit that are indicating a deficit. The likelihood is that all of those schools will need to find some level of reduction in posts. So the full impact of the current financial position of our schools with regards to that funding reduction is yet to be seen in their financial planning. And until we see that, obviously it'll then filter through. There'll be a time delay for it to filter through into the classroom and in terms of their delivery. So this is going to take a little bit of time to work through the system. We're trying to manage those risks and ensure the schools can deliver sustainable budgets, but the full impact of that on standards, delivery of the RAS, and other priorities that we have corporately for our schools is yet to be determined, really.
Thank you, Anthony. I think inevitably in anything like this, when you undertake evaluation or impact of a change to service or change to budget, then it'll have to be sort of incremental because it will be done over a period of time. Sometimes you won't see a true impact for maybe, 6, 12 months, etc. Sometimes even a little bit longer, but thank you for that. Anna, did you have any follow-up questions you want to come back on, or?
Yes, thank you. So again, regarding the SDN standards related to good research management. So in view of that impact that, as you said, is yet to be foreseen, is there a risk that as schools are inspected over the next 3-year period, that could be a potential area where they may be failing to meet those standards?
Yeah, it's a definite risk. We aren't aware of any particular schools that we have that specific concern with regards to at this moment in time. But given that those cuts are still working their way through the system and schools are still working through those plans, I think it's too early to say that that's not a risk. We've got existing processes in place that help us to support schools to manage the identified risks so that schools aren't in that position. But we don't yet know what the situation will be for next financial year in terms of the funding implications for the council, what that then means for schools. So all of that obviously will add to the current financial situation our schools find themselves in. And this is a similar conversation that's happening right across Wales at the moment. And in many local authorities, they were in a more difficult and challenging position than this local authority with regards to their schools' budgets. And I know in some authorities, they've come across schools that are in a very difficult financial position and possibly even irrecoverable deficits sitting within those schools. We're not currently in that position, and we don't expect to be in that position either, but it certainly is a risk in terms of the resource management in our schools could be impacted as we move through this process.
Can I come in as well? That if you actually look at the last point, the use of shared resources through effective partnership, through efficient partnership work. If you think of the work, the next report that's come in, where we actually look at community focused schools, and we actually look across the council, so we're not having duplication of activity from different service areas in the council and actually from the community. That will support our schools as well, to actually ensure that there is focused work going in to support our children and young people in its widest sense. And if you actually look at the sort of, we're looking at priorities for improvement. Our head teachers are quite focused on sort of, these are the school development plan priorities, because these are what we can afford, and actually making sure that possibly they've had to adapt them this year and actually look in a different way moving forward. So as governors, those of you that are sitting on governing bodies, you'll be receiving your school development plans in this term. So you will actually see how your head teachers have financed those plans within the current budget. So I think it is, you know, with the work that Anthony's team have actually done to support our schools, you know, since 2015, shows that how we have, you know, all our schools have got good financial management to support this moving forward.
Okay, Anna, did you want to follow?
Thank you. So just to elaborate on Laura's question with regards to 519, obviously you can't preempt any decision with regards to the next budget setting period. But obviously in the council's midterm financial plan, there is a predicted deficit of over 10 million next year. So on that basis, if there was a further reduction in school budgets in the next financial year, what tools or to what extent can schools mitigate against an impact on delivery and outcomes in that scenario?
I'll just answer that if that's okay. Okay, Anna, that's a hypothetical question. Inevitably, as we stated earlier, council hasn't agreed any budgets at the moment. I appreciate what you've said about the predicted deficit, but I think that matter is for this scrutiny then to discuss when we have an actual budget setting process, when budgets are determined and voted on by council, and we can certainly pick it back up then in this scrutiny under the MTFPs and school budgets. So when we actually have firm data and firm agreement on the budgets.
If I can, it's regarding, bear with me 1 second. 5.4 around ways in which schools are obviously trying to manage their budgets. The mentions reduced agency spending. Can I ask if any assessment has been made within the local authority about utilising the recently launched national supply pool for Wales for supply teachers?
That hasn't actually launched. There's been a lot of, whilst there's been a lot of discussion about it, it hasn't actually launched because, how can I put this politely? It wasn't actually set up properly, and the schools, the local, it was meant to be piloted in a couple of local authorities that already had their own supply. Were already managing their own supply agencies, their own supply cover. That hasn't taken place, so it hasn't been able to be rolled out across the other local authorities because the pilot work in a couple of the North authorities who've retained their own supply cover hasn't taken place. So our HR department are working with other HR departments across Wales to actually see how this can take forward. But there is nothing being taken forward by any of the South Wales authorities because the pilot work hasn't been evaluated properly yet.
Sorry, just to follow that. So do we have any indication of when that information will be available at this stage? Okay, thank you.
Okay, Anna, all okay? Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, we'll move on to Jeff then, please, Jeff.
Thank you, Chair. I've got several questions, but I'll stick to one or two as previously discussed, and then perhaps with your permission, I'll write the existing questions or the extra questions I have to yourself and Jane, and then perhaps you can forward them on and ask for responses via the same resource coming back, Is that okay, Chair?
Yeah, I tell you what we'll do, Jeff, is if you want to ask a couple of your questions, then we'll just pause, see if any other colleagues want to ask some questions, then I'll come back to you then to agree that moving forward.
Perfect. Thank you, Chair. Okay. At table at 4.3, this is the one that evidences the financial risk category. Yeah. In the report, we can see that a school that is evidenced as red, we know which one that is. Can I just ask how many schools south of the borough are in amber and how many schools north of the borough are in amber or expected to be?
So the table in 4.3 is the financial risk categorisation from last financial year. The current categorisations are going to Cabinet on the 11th of October. I have that information here in terms of the numbers. So shall I circulate that to the group in terms of answering Jeff's question subsequent to the meeting?
Once the Cabinet report has been published, I think, because it needs to go into once it's been published, which I think is next week anyway, it'll be in the public domain anyway.
I asked the question being simply to gain some kind of idea. It doesn't matter if it's accurate, but just an idea, because on a further subject in this meeting on a different topic, there's some questions on north and south, and I just wanted to bring them in. I'm just being a bit devious, if you like, to think about it, but that's what I'd like to do. Okay. Shakes her head over, I'm not devious. Yes, I am. Right. In which case then, at point 4.9, school budgets, schools overall have a real term reduction of approximately 38k for primary and 150k for secondary in April 2023. This was before the increase in fuel costs, teachers' pay and pensions, and with other costs increasing as well by an average of 11% across the board for inflation. So my question is, how can schools be expected to manage a downturn in funding and an 11% increase in costs? Now, if I've worked it out right, there's a 3% downturn and 11% inflation, that's 14%. Perhaps I'm wrong, Anthony, but how will that affect the learning process of our young people?
In terms of the funding, if I can clarify, all of the inflationary pressures were put into the funding initially, as would happen every financial year. So the full growth requirement was funded against each individual line. And at that point, then the nearly 3% budget reduction was applied. The expectation then being on schools that they would have to find 3% budget savings against their base budget in order to be able to manage on a sustainable basis. So there's a cash increase, but a real terms decrease of 2.89%.
So thank you for that, Anthony, but I'm not understanding. So perhaps you'd help me understand. When you set the budgets, unless you've got this magic eye, which I don't know about, you wouldn't have known that 11% inflation was going to hit everywhere. Now, some of the information or some of the funding may well come down from Welsh Government, that is for teachers' pay, etc., etc. It may be all funded, part funded, I'm not sure. But you wouldn't have known about the 11% inflation across the board, and you wouldn't have known how much additional costs for electric, gas, blah, 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 was going to affect the schools. That does affect the schools, whether you've planned for it or whether you haven't. And I would say here that unless you had this magic board, I don't think you could have budgeted for inflation being what it was. 3%, yes, because that was what we predicted. 11%, no.
Yeah, I
got
can't
it wrong?
remember the actual figure that was included, but it was a significant figure. We'll double check that with the accountants and confirm that position, but it was a significant figure for general inflation that was included. An even bigger figure for energy in terms of electricity and gas. And all of that gas and electricity is bought in advance. So we're aware of what the pricing is that we'd purchase for the forthcoming year. And also the pay award inflation, that would have been fully reflected in the school's funding. But we'll confirm the detail of that and share it with the group.
My question in the first place was, how will all this affect the young people's aspirations, expectations, and really the local authorities as well? So we've got the parents on one hand who are pushing to make sure their children achieve. We've got the schools pushing to achieve. We've got your department so pushing to achieve. All correct with less money. So how will it affect the children?
I'll come in there, Jeff,
Please.
if that's okay. Yeah, no, of course. So twofold. One, our colleagues have already reiterated there will be an evaluation of the impact, and we will have that subsequently as a scrutiny. And secondly, when we have validated results from this year's exams, we'll have that in the new year, likely, I think so. Out validate. You know, we can then, we have them, but they don't actually get the word's not validated, is it is validated really until they're actually published then to us in the new year. So we can also look at that in scrutiny then, you know, when we come back after the winter break. Yes, we can look at that as well. Now that is something, I'm sorry, that we can actually look at that. It'll be 12 months on. Sorry, that's what I'm thinking, 12 months on, because the impact, as we've said, may not be seen on what that reduction in budget is. The impact on teaching and achievement may not be seen for some time. Do you see what I mean? So that goes back to my point I made to Anthony earlier, is we'll have an evaluation, but as for as a scrutiny, we need to be mindful and remember in our forward work plan, let's bring that back. Yeah, let's I've made a note of it anyway, but you know, 6, 12 months, even 18 months onwards, that may be the time that you'll actually see the real impact, positive or negative, we don't know at the moment, on a budget reduction for our schools.
That, Chair, I understand totally where you're coming from. But this is about, I'm risking the wrath of Lisa now, but this is about, yeah, budgetary responsibility, yeah, and planning forward. And I take exactly what Anthony said. He knew what the price of electricity brought forward was. Obviously, there's a small deficit. He's going to come back to us. So if that's possible, Chair, that would be great, because that would give us an oversight or an insight, if you like, to what we're looking for in 12 months' time.
Yeah, Jeff, we'll certainly get back to you with regards to what was the estimated inflation percentage and also those energy costs as well. So
Thank
officers
you.
can bring that back to our colleagues. Thanks.
At that point, Chair, I'll hand back to you, because obviously I've got lots more and I don't want to take up the time.
You're more than welcome to ask one more and then we can pause. Jeff, do you want to ask one more?
Yeah, by all means. At point 3.7, Welsh Government gave 1.7 million to schools. Just a very simple, easy question, please. How much, if any, was taken out for admin by MTCBC or the department before it got to schools? And Anthony's going to say none.
I'll have to double check, but my understanding is we didn't take any out of admin from the additional money that was transferred in between January and March.
Which case, that would have put the school's budgets over 5%, which, if I remember rightly, is what you allowed it to be, the department allows it to be. So when we go further forward, the schools would have spent that money, as you rightly say in your report. So can I ask, what results did we see from the extra spending in money, and how did that manifest itself with either individual schools, schools south of the borough, north of the borough, or in general?
Well, some of the additional money was for specific things, right? So it wasn't just a general. So one of the things that Welsh Government gave was for the RRS. Please don't ask me what RRS stands for. I will find out. I can't remember what it stands for. But as governors, the schools then had to present a plan for how they spent that and then evaluate that plan moving forward. That's where you will have found, because a lot of the schools use that for additional staffing on fixed term contracts, because they knew that was coming to an end. So that would have finished. And then the other grant was was maintenance, wasn't it? So there was specific money that went in. So if schools had paid against maintenance, that was taken out. So they weren't general, nice little grants you can spend on anything. They were very specific. So some of them had an impact in that the RRS would have had an impact because there were staffing attached to that. And then the other bit was around maintenance, which perhaps Anthony, because it was around works that they'd already had done, so it was able to manage that budget. Yeah.
Follow on for that bit, Chair, if you don't mind. Yeah. So you've just replied that. So we'll just look at the bit about where they brought the teachers in on short-term contracts. And I see you said there've been some results from that. Can we see evidence of some of those results? And if so, can we see it above, on a whole borough-wide basis or north and south basis, whatever you want to produce it as?
No, because that school, sorry, Jeff, I didn't mean to be as blunt as that. But it went directly to schools. It was a grant that came via the local authority. It went directly to schools. It was managed by schools, and we were told very firmly by Welsh Government that we were not to actually gather information on that. It went back to governors because it was managed by schools. This is the accountability measures now from Welsh Government that are very keen that actually it is a school improvement, individual schools. So those reports have gone to governors on an annual basis. You know, if you do want some, I can pull some stuff out, but that's really going against Welsh Government expectations for us. We shouldn't be pulling this together from a local authority perspective.
That, yeah, but in order for us to scrutinise and in order for Sue to be able to look at her department, every school comes into that department, every result, everything comes in, because that's what Sue and her department are judged on. Now, I accept that Welsh Government have not given any parameters, but in a general term, could we perhaps have something just to give us some idea what the money was spent on and how it's helped results? Because if we know that, then if additional monies ever becomes available in the future, we can say to Sue, look, perhaps you could spend it on X, Y, and Z. That's got a proven result.
I was hoping Lawrence was going to come in there and say something.
Yeah, I tried to come in because basically, in answer to your question, Jeff, there's a requirement that governing bodies, as part of the reporting, had to provide a RRS report as well as PDG. So there are reports from every school relating to how that money was spent.
We take that the next step further. I've got a chair and vice chair's meeting next week. I'll put that on the agenda, Lawrence, so we can actually discuss how we could possibly provide some information on what it was spent for and some good examples. I will, not to steal the Southern Cluster's thunder, but actually they did a very specific piece of work. They brought in a company called Place to Be to actually do a lot of well-being work with pupils and staff, because this RRS was as a result of COVID. So it was an additional grant put in to hopefully mitigate some of the effects of COVID. So they brought in this company called Place to Be, which has been very effective in not only supporting children and young people, but perhaps more important, as important, supporting the well-being of staff. So that was a good example of how they utilised the RRS, and that was done on a cluster basis because they were able to pool the money, and it was more effective going in, on a cluster basis as opposed to individually.
That helps consider.
You're welcome, Jeff. Jeff, we'll just take a pause for other colleagues and then I'll come back to you just in case. All right. Just for our new colleagues as well. Just to share this with you, what sometimes happens is we get the fixed budgets from, what the local authority has agreed at council stage. But then sometimes, and I don't know if it's likely next year, again, we can't tell at the moment, but sometimes we'll get additional budgets. Now, these ones were in relation to additional support for COVID. As you can imagine, it was a real difficult time for everybody, especially our young people and our schools. But sometimes we'll get some towards the end of financial year, and then they are given to our schools or to the local authority, and they have to spend them on particular areas. So, you know, once we had a maintenance additional fund, didn't we? You know, that had to be spent even for our newer schools, whereas really some of our older schools could have done with the additional money, but it was sort of split out equally across the board. So, you know, that sometimes happens, and then that's where Jeff is coming from, really, is to find out, you know, how useful is it, what impact does it have? But sometimes, because the statutory duties of our governing body, they take accountability and responsibility for that. Okay, so we'll follow that one up. Okay, Hannah, over to you next.
Thank you very much. I'd like to go back to 5.18, please. And whilst you say that at the moment it's too early to evaluate the impact of the budget reductions, I actually do think that in part it can be analysed now, because you may, for example, see the class sizes growing, a reduction in Key Stage 4 curriculum offer for the academic year. This will already be set in place now for September from the budget that you already have, and that can impact standards of teaching and learning and the workload increase as well for the workload for the workforce. So I'm just wondering, have you had them conversations yet with your head teachers, because they will already know what the timetable looks like and how many children are in our classes?
I think we're waiting for class size information to come through. There's a return there's usually at the end of September, isn't it, Ant, that we get the class sizes. We do get that back shortly. So it is statutory return. When it comes to Key Stage 4, yes, I agree. That we haven't seen that as yet. We're not seeing that. However, we are aware that there will be implications moving forward. So to preempt that and to support our schools, we have a meeting on October the 6th with the college to actually have a look at how we can support each other. We're a small local authority. Schools can, I don't know, many of you are old enough to remember the 14 to 19 pathway, which always gets thrown back. There was a lot of money attached to that, but it was also some really good work. So how we can actually mirror that in the current climate. We've got some minority subjects like music, like drama, that are only being delivered in perhaps 1 or 2 of our secondary schools. So that means we haven't got equity of offer for all our young people. So it's how we can actually support all our young people that perhaps want to go to music and then travel from one school to another school to actually do that. So we've got an initial meeting on October the 6th in the college. We're also, as part of that, we're also looking at some vocational work that can be done pre-16, again with a new report that's just been launched about offering that vocational qualification to pre-16. We can't have it in each of the schools, so how can the college support us to deliver that? How can we actually give equity of opportunity for all our children and young people? So whilst this year, I would say, because obviously for this September, our Key Stage 4 curriculum was already in place. They'd already made the choices. The timetable was already in place. We're having an early discussion now to see how the college and as an entity, we can support and negate any disparity in that Key Stage 4 curriculum offer moving forward.
Okay, Hannah. Okay. Liz.
Shall I? Yeah, I gotta say, this is quite distressing for me. I'm sitting here, it is for all of us, I think, isn't it? Because, we're talking about things that we don't really want to be doing. We're in this situation and we have to do what we can. Some of the things that hit me in the face when I was reading this report, one of them was the 4 redundancies in music services. I mean, one of the things that I'd be really, really concerned about, even more than results, is well-being, isn't it? Because obviously without well-being you don't get results anyway. So I was really concerned to see that. So are there, can you actually learn an instrument in school these days? Is that something that is still happening, or is that gradually?
Yes, Welsh Government provided a P buzzer to all schools for all children when they launched the National Music Plan. And I had the pleasure of walking around Reed Agreed today while they were playing the P buzzers. I won't say it was very musical, but there was certainly a sound coming out of the hall when they were playing that. But there is still an opportunity. And Andrea, the music's music service sits under Andrea, and she's very keen to actually see how, because we've had a small amount of funding to deliver the music plan outside the service level agreement, to how we can actually promote music and promote some different ideas to engage children and young people in music, because as you say, it's not just the academic side of music, it's actually the well-being part of music that is very keen, and that enjoyment and that love of music moving forward. And it does help with maths and things like that. And it has got. So we are looking at that. I think it is something that we will be taking back to Welsh Government. It's something that we will be asking at Ardhu. That is where schools, as budgets, because Anthony said, our schools actually are not as badly affected by budgets as schools in other local authorities, but they will make cuts in those minority areas that are seen as, please don't tell Dawn that, that are seen as, it's periphery subjects. And that's a concern from all of us, I think, that how we can actually continue to promote that. I think, in all fairness to Lisa, we're coming on, when we come on to the community focused schools report, it is something that she is keen to actually see how we can utilise the community. Councillor Lee Davis is there's a big music studio in 3Gs which was funded through 21st Century Schools. So it's how we can utilise that and how we can promote that use with all schools. So schools don't necessarily see that they have to deliver the curriculum, but actually they can utilise the community and support in the community to give those opportunities to the children and young people.
What I was going to suggest is that, there's a lot of us out in the community that have resources to be able to work in partnership. And also we have, of course, Community Music Wales, in Red House. So there's a lot of possibilities there. The other thing on 520, it talked about central services being impacted. What do you mean by central services being impacted?
That was actually the reduction in the music service, and it was that. So it's where we've lost staff. We haven't. We've said in the next one about a small impact on the education welfare service. That again, that's a service that is funded by schools, but it balanced itself out this year. Like some withdrew, but actually others bought into the service. So that's where the impact is.
I just wanted to draw your attention as well. You probably know all about this, but I just wanted to raise it. When I visited the schools that I visited when we did that study a while ago, it was pointed out to me that in the Welsh schools, they very often have to buy additional resources, don't they? And the fact that they have to buy double the books, for example, in Welsh and in English, or also the fact that resources are very often not available in Welsh, and they have to actually make their own resources in terms of ALN, in particular. And I was just wondering if this is taken into account in terms of when funding is given to the Welsh School.
Were you sitting in my meeting this morning? I've been to Rhyd y Gryg this morning with Ellis as part of the road. As Ellis and myself are that's the chief exec for the new members. Ellis and myself are on a road trip around schools, and we were at Rhyd y Gryg this morning, and it was something that Alwyn brought up. So I've said I'd go back because my understanding is that there's a small pot of money in the Welsh schools to support the additionality, but I wanted to be able to give the actual figures to Rhyd y Gryg and to Santes Tydfil. So it was on my list to talk to Anthony and Joe to actually speak to Rhyd y Gryg and Santes Tydfil. So once they've done that, they can provide an answer to that question, Liz.
And I think Anthony's got an additional.
Yeah, just to say there is an additional allocation in recognition of those additional demands in those schools. I'll have to double check the figures and report it back.
Liz, any additional questions? You all okay? Okay. Colleagues, any other questions? Clive?
Yes, I noticed in the table on page 13, Cyfarthfa High School seemed to have made a dramatic downturn. They went from plus 9.5% outturn to minus 5.6. Is that because the numbers at the school have fallen, or is there must have something dramatic must have happened for it to go?
It was numbers and retrospective clawback, wasn't it, Anthony? They hadn't factored in the numbers. They were setting their own budget based on what they thought. They hadn't, so there has been a massive retrospective clawback.
Okay, Clive? Okay, Natalie?
I appreciate you haven't got figures as yet as to how schools are impacted with regards to pupil to staff ratio, but obviously we know that now we've got teachers with bigger class sizes. Have schools and school leaders been encouraged to do risk assessments about the impact that may have going forward on staff and the additional costs that may cause with staff workload? Are there sort of work impact assessments in place around that?
When class sizes were set up, the schools would have been expected to consider that. For foundation learning classes, there is a statutory obligation that they are 30 or below. That's set by Welsh Government. Unfortunately, it's not the same for Key Stage 2, but schools will be looking at that. And of course, some of our classroom sizes dictate how many children can safely be in those rooms. So yes, schools will have looked at that and will have shared with the governors where they've had to make some quite difficult decisions. And it may have been that there are mixed classes where there would mixed year group classes where there wouldn't have been where there preferably wouldn't have been mixed year group classes. But yes, it is something that they would have had to consider.
Wasn't pressing it a second time, it was just going off. So when you say roughly 30 children per class, do you mean for foundation phase? Is that 30 children per nursery and then 30 children per reception, or combined?
Nursery is different.
Yeah.
You can have as many children as you like in nursery.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. And if you have a split nursery reception class, if the majority of the children are nursery, the 30 doesn't count. But once you get to reception, which is statutory school age, because nursery isn't statutory school age, reception year 1 and year 2 have to have 30. But if the majority of the children in a nursery reception class are nursery, you can have more than 30. And if children arrive after September, there's a count date in September, that doesn't, that you can have more than 30. So there are parameters around it, but as a general rule of thumb, it's 30 for reception year 1 and year 2, but nursery does complicate the matter.
Any other questions? Okay, all right, colleagues, I can't see any other hands raised or microphones on. So thank you so much for those questions. Jeff, we'll come back if officers permit, if you could let me have those questions and we'll get those answers for you shared with the rest of the Scrutiny Committee then as well. Colleagues, any comments or observations on the report? Jeff?
Forward. Oh, sorry. I just want to thank you for putting forward a difficult report, because it is difficult. It makes difficult reading, especially for the new members of our Scrutiny Committee. It does make difficult reading. I promise to bring those questions forward to Lisa in 48 hours, and then perhaps you can pass them on. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, colleagues, the recommendations in the report were: Scrutiny members noted the contents of the report and considered implications for monitoring of school budgets and the prioritisation of schools funding in the Council's budget setting processes 2024-2025 onwards. I think we've done that sufficiently. I've made a couple of notes from some of your questions, and we'll talk about those when we talk about evaluation and forward plan later on in the agenda. So on that point, thank you to Sue and Anthony for answering those questions. Anthony, you're welcome to stay for community focused schools.
Please, because in case there's a query about
Anthony, you need to stay for community focused schools. Very assertive today. Has anybody noticed that Sue's very assertive today? But we welcome that assertiveness, Sue, and appreciate it. So thank you for that. We're now going to move on to agenda item number 4, which is community focused schools, the North Cluster, and to receive a report on the pilot programme. the pilot of it, and to debate this and ask questions, of course, on the impact this has had on pupil community learning and wellbeing, and again use this to inform some of our future priorities. So welcome to Lisa as well into the chamber this afternoon for the scrutiny meeting, and guys, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, I'll give you a brief summary of where we are, and then it's over to Lisa to answer the questions. Members may be or may not be aware that actually we took the decision last year to do a pilot in the north of the county. It is being rolled out, and I'm sure some of you may have questions on the rollout later on. But this focuses very much on the impact of the work in the North Cluster. The schools originally put money in, as it said in the report, but actually we secured the money to be able to give that money back to the schools. Welsh Government, this is a Welsh Government priority, and some of the funding has come from Welsh Government to allow us to do this work. We've also worked very closely with Cardiff Met on some research around this, and we are hoping we have gone to Welsh Government to continue that work to support how we roll it out in the Southern Cluster and the Mid Cluster. So I think the report is quite detailed. So I'm just going to, Lisa was appointed as our Community Focused Schools Manager for the North. A lot of learning. I've done one-to-one with the other two managers this afternoon, and it is very much they've learned from what Lisa has done, and actually it won't be such a bumpy ride, I don't think, for them as they roll forward, because it was very much a learning curve for us, I think, last year, Lisa, wasn't it? So I think it's just over to you for questions to see how you feel this has been taken forward.
Okay, thanks, Sue. So again, guys, just for us really to discuss and debate the content of the report. So questions, any questions? Anna. Yes, Anna, it is Anna. It keeps on coming up as Paul, but you are Anna. Thank you, Anna.
Sorry, thank you. Just two questions from me, thank you. So regarding 5.12 refers to the Food and Fun programme, but I'm thinking of these kind of programmes more generally, not just a Gethy Vylog, is how is attendance monitored to ensure that these holiday programmes are engaging with the target cohort?
The Food and Fun, we've historically we only had it in two schools. They were in the north of the cluster. Since it started, Goitra has been the school that it was since it was SHEP, the old school holiday enrichment programme. Goitra was the only school that ever took part in it. The last couple of years we rolled it out to St Aloysius, and then last year, so not last summer, the summer 2022, Cyfarthfa Park also took part. We were able this year to actually support, through a grant, to support somebody in public health to roll it out. And it was in 15 schools, which I think took us all a little bit by surprise, that there were 15 schools, and actually managing to roll it out into 15 schools was challenging, shall we say, to say the least. So there are lots of lessons that we need to learn, because certainly I went around to see about 10 of the provisions, and Andrea May went around to see the other 5. In some of the schools, it definitely hit the target audience, and I think Lisa would say it hit the target audience in Gethy Vylog. I did go to a school, and it was in the south of the cluster, and the staff that were running it said, this is a childcare provision for working parents. So it didn't necessarily hit the vulnerable learners. So we've already had a debrief. We haven't, the final attendance figures don't have to be in until the end of September, that gathering for the end of September. But we've already set up a steering group which Lisa is actually chairing, with not just our officers, but also community members, because we were running it in 15 schools. So that was the first 12 days of the school holidays. Some of our community groups thought, well, hang's about now. We've got, you're taking our children. So it's how we maximise the support for the children through the summer holidays. So you've got the vulnerable children able to attend, I never get it right, Food and Fun for the first 12 days. But then actually there is provision for them in the community groups for the rest of the summer holidays. We did put aside a small amount of money this year to do that, but the community groups then didn't. We didn't spend it all. The community groups didn't buy into that offer because it went out there too late. So there are key lessons learned from us for how we ensure that it is targeted at the vulnerable, at the right families.
Thank you. And similarly, but looking at the community focused schools approach in the north more generally, has there been any observed impact on either attendance or attainment within the North Cluster so far?
So we've run a project in the north with the Penrhydre cluster schools around persistent absentees. So the project was aimed around family engagement because that's a community focused schools priority. At the end of October half term, we're going to be using the data from the attendance from the local authority to measure that impact. But not only measuring the impact of the data around attendance, we're going to measure family engagement, well-being around families, and communication and support generally for the families. Because when we looked at the persistent absentees from year 6 going into year 7, you would think that, or you would assume that those families would be the ones that needed support, and there wasn't one family open to any support service, which was quite alarming. So we've obviously supported those families through family engagement and made referrals to relevant agencies if the families wanted it. But we will be doing an impact report for that after October half term, because that's when the data is going to be reported.
And we wanted to make sure they actually attended school for the October half term, because we could have done they engaged with the project with Lisa, but actually part of it was to make sure that they continued to attend school. So we could have given you a positive report because they attended with Lisa, but actually if they don't attend Penrhydre, it hasn't worked.
Can I just ask one point of clarification on that then? So obviously we know we measure attendance, now we measure persistent absence. So how do you measure family engagement?
So a number of sessions, engagement with the families, and then obviously if it was support we provide for those families in regards to referrals or any type of engagement. So during the summer we run it, well, during every holiday week we run a family engagement programme. We've offered it a programme out to families. So we've linked families into our community provision such as 3G's Campus Community Hub, obviously using Penrhydre as a school site as well, because our whole purpose of transition is to get them into Penrhydre and support that transition. So we will be measuring through family engagement, attendances, referrals, etc. We around wellbeing as well, just to point out, for the persistent absentees programme, we're going to be using a wellbeing impact tool. So we'll also be providing that as part of the report as well.
Okay, thanks, Lise. Thanks, Anna. Any other questions on this report, colleagues? Lawrence?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Regarding statements in 4.5 and 4.6, it says the schools in North Cluster originally contributed £5,000 for DCF, for schools manager, etc., and the funding. So following on from our previous conversation about funding, says so bearing that in mind, with the financial challenges schools are facing, how would they be expected to give priority to this initiative or stroke expectation going forward in order to maintain what perhaps successes that you've achieved?
As you said, in 4.5, we did actually give the funding back because there was an underspend. So that whilst they originally agreed to put £5,000 into the role, there was underspend in funding, so they didn't give any money, so it was given back as part of the work. So we're funding it through a shared prosperity fund moving forward for the next 2 years. We are looking to, as part of the role, it is how this work can be sustained. That's part of the work that everything that Lisa's doing, whilst her team are doing things. And it refers to an exercise, something that was done in Pantascatlog. Whilst Lisa's team delivered it originally, the school has now taken it on, so it's sustainable. So the expectation is that the work becomes sustainable. And I take on board what you're saying about budgets, Lawrence, but actually if Lisa's team can demonstrate that this is making an impact on family engagement, on attainment, on attendance, that supports the school, gives credence to the schools in actually taking this work forward.
I understand that, but as you say, if the schools are expected to perhaps pick it up going forward, then that might be a challenge as well, without any additional financial resources. I'll come back in a second. I just lost my screen. Yeah, bear with me. Oops. In 5.3, you said about the collaboration with ed teachers and leaders in schools and provisions to understand needs. To what degree were governing bodies involved in the collaborations?
Right, I'll start and then Lisa come in, because whilst when we did the pilot, or governing bodies, and it was when Jane was still within our department, Jane will remember pulling together governing bodies. This is for the North Cluster, don't forget, Lawrence, not for the, we haven't done the work with the Southern Cluster or the Mid Cluster yet. So as part of the pilot with Cardiff Met, governors were spoken to, and they had meetings with the team that were doing the report. We're doing the research from Cardiff Met, and have actually continued that engagement with Cardiff Met and move forward. So there will have been governors that may have been spoken to, because that research was then carried out in the South Cluster and the Mid Cluster. So there would have been the opportunity for governors to actually engage. As part of it, we also engaged with all, Jane, correct me if I'm wrong, we could engage with the ward councillors as well. There was a session with ward councillors as part of the research that was carried out initially. So yeah, governors have been involved.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from there, because I was, when Cardiff met to the Southern Cluster, I met up with them as well. But what I'm wondering is, in terms of the actual decision making, I know in terms of the research, but actually when some decisions were made regarding what activities were going to actually take place. That's what I'm wondering, to what degree were governors involved at that point in time?
Yeah, so in regards to decision making around the school's action plans, head teachers were met with. So we looked at identifying the needs within the school, and that was identified through various sources. But the action plans were actually agreed by the head teachers without the governors. I know obviously when we delivered in the governors' conference, I believe you was there, Lawrence. I know a few governors had questions around why they weren't involved in that. I just for everybody to know, I delivered sessions in all of the schools in the north, either in twilight or inset days, around community focused schools, what it means for Welsh Government, what the plans were for the north. And it was up to the head teachers, obviously, to invite staff teams and governors. Unfortunately, no governors were part of any of those. But if anybody wants any sessions done, obviously moving forward, that is absolutely fine. I think the learning that we can take from that is obviously with the mid and south as well, because we haven't involved governors in any of those sessions. They can definitely take, the new managers can take that on and make sure that governors are included in those overview sessions and in any of the mapping exercises or the decision making around the school plans.
Okay, thank you. And just a couple more.
Can I come in there as well, Lawrence? We are asking, as a result of the conference, there is a request going to governors to have a community-focused schools governor, a named governor, not a community. So I know there are community governors, but actually a governor who would be the point of contact for community focused schools activities. So whilst Lisa and her team, the other community focused schools managers, it would be beneficial to engage with all the governors, but there is one governor that would actually be the key focus, and that's a request that's coming to the governing bodies this term. I've put it into my report, and perhaps we'll talk about it more in the chair and vice chair's meeting next week.
in 510, so a pilot program with Play Wales and Pantascalog Stay and Play was very successful, and obviously these pilots, as an example, are very good. Again, it goes back to my point earlier: is if a program is successful and is going forward, how is that going to be sustained going forward in terms of support, stroke finance, resources, and the rest of it? Because again, is the expectation that schools will pick these things up?
So the Stay and Play pilot in Pent was successful. The head teacher there decided to involve the whole school, so the programme was open up to the whole school. I think due to the number of parents and children attending and the type of equipment they had in Pent, the head teacher decided that due to the success, he would carry that on using his own staff team in other schools. So we piloted in St Aloysius and Goetre at the moment. Again, it's a decision from the head, but they would decide on how the pilot would run. So, for example, in Goetre, they're already running an after-school club for their primary provision, which means that parents and carers often hang around the yard or got to go home and come back to pick the children up. So they are pilot and they stay and play with the foundation phase. So they've actually got the siblings of the pupils that are in the primary after-school clubs on site as well. So they've got the whole family then on site. In regards to the work around community focused schools, every project we do we make it sustainable or as sustainable as possible. And that means without funding and without staffing as much as what we possibly can. So for the Stay and Play pilot, it was funded through Play Wales for £500 worth of equipment for each school. My staff team worked for 6 weeks in Pant and for 2 weeks and 4 weeks in St Aloysius. And again, then we would look at how that would be sustainable. But for Stay and Play, it's not actually meant to be sustained by any school staff. It's meant to be a use of school grounds activity. So parents stay with their children and play with no staff intervention.
Okay, thank you. Finally, as regards the focused staff, isn't it a case, is it 2 years that you've had the grant for? So it'll be ending the end of next year, is it? Or 23, 24?
August 2025.
25, I see. So is there any plans? What's going to happen after that? Do we know yet?
We don't know yet. I am taking a report to council in November on the whole of the community focused schools on our project, on our plans moving forward for the next 2 years, because obviously it's funded through Shared Prosperity Fund, so council need to be able to see the impact of some of the work that we've done and actually agree some of the work that we're moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Okay, Lawrence.
Yes,
Thank
okay.
you. Thank you for those questions as well. Liz.
Right. Looking at this report now, I'm just real, it looks like really, really good work and the sort of thing that, makes an impact. Looks great. Just wondering how the Welsh education would fit into this, because they're not in, there's the northern cluster and the mid cluster, and the Welsh education is in a different bit, isn't it? It's in the cluster that serves
Right.
Rita Wine.
Well, no, because what
No.
we've done is because the children still live in Merthyr, right? So while it is engagement with that, the community focused schools manager that has been appointed to the southern cluster is Welsh speaking. So what I've done is each of the community focused schools managers, whilst they're in charge of a cluster, they've also got a local authority brief. So the community focused schools manager in the southern cluster is also going to engage with Santes Tydfil, Safle Gurnos, and Rhyd y Grig, as well as yourself and the other Welsh medium partners, to actually see how they can support that. But can I just say that the community focused schools manager of the Cyfarthfa cluster emailed all the head teachers in her cluster, including Santes Tydfil, Santa's Tittle is the only school so far that's got back to her. So I think we are looking at our schools that are schools that are readily engaged with the community and actually seeing how they can support that. But it is part, and she will engage in the WEF. She is going to be part of the Welsh Education Forum moving forward. So whilst she's got a Southern Cluster brief, she's also got the Welsh language brief across the county borough. And I'm sure she will be coming to see you if she's not already in your diary.
Okay, colleagues, nobody else has indicated to ask any questions. Are there any comments on the report or observations on the report?
It's one thing that mentioned in the last report as well, in terms of evaluation, and this is obviously, you know, all to do with impact on well-being. How exactly do you evaluate well-being within it?
So we've got a wellbeing tool that we use for certain projects. I think it's difficult at the moment because we've been supporting individual families or projects. So we can look at, for example, our persistent absentees and measure wellbeing across the programme. So they would be measuring individuals there. But evaluation tools is obviously something we're going to develop as a local authority. So at a wide rather than cluster approach. So we have got plans in place to look at exactly what we're going to be using, because there's different types of tools out there. And I think we need to get one that is fit for purpose for this project specifically. So it's definitely in hand and we can report on that.
Okay, thanks, Liz. Well, guys, we were asked to discuss again and debate the content of the report, reflecting on obviously dialogue that we had from previous meetings and further aspects of this agenda that need scrutinising. Again, I've made a couple of points, you know, and I know that Sue and the team will take up Lawrence's point about that governor engagement as well in relation to the community focused schools aspect. So we appreciate that. Thank you ever so much. So I'll conclude that report then as well. Okay. And thank you, Lisa, for that. Thank you, Sue. And thank you, Anthony, for your attendance today. We are now looking at the forward work plan. Sue, happy for you to stay. If not, I can just give some feedback on our technical meetings and then the forward work plan and evaluation. Up to you. Up to you. No, you're all right. You can leave. I'm going to be assertive now. You can leave, Sue. Thank you, Diolch. Thank you for your attendance, guys. Much appreciated. Okay, colleagues, the next item on the agenda is item number 4, the forward work programme. Now, bear with me. Now, behind the scenes, but open and transparent, obviously, Gareth Lewis is my deputy and myself, my vice chair, what do I call you, Gareth? There he is, look, give us a little wave, Gareth. We meet quarterly with Sue and officers and the cabinet member as well, just so that we can discuss, you know, things that are afoot, if you like, you know, anything really in relation to education services within the borough, education services that we've heard perhaps on the grapevine affecting anybody from an all Wales perspective. Sue just mentioned the vocational qualifications review. You know, the landscape of qualifications is changing rapidly at the moment. There are a lot of qualifications under review. One of which will affect us is GCSEs, etc. Then you've got the pre-vocational, so the pre-16 option for vocational learning, and then you've got the 14 to 19 review as well. So there's a lot going on. So we often touch base and have chats about those as well, and what we could possibly pick up on in the future. And inevitably, what I do and what Gareth does is we scrutinise the Cabinet forward work plan. So the Cabinet has a forward work plan as well, and we scrutinise that. We touch base on that and make sure that that aligns with our own scrutiny forward work plan. So one of the things we actually looked at was LRB capacity, okay, prior to a report going to Cabinet in December. And so I just wanted to remind you, you will have, I think you may have had a diary invite already, and that's the 21st of November, 2 till 4 o'clock, a workshop really on that LRB capacity. Okay, and obviously within your papers you have got a copy of the forward work plan. Remember guys, this is a fluid document, so we can always review it, which we do every time we have the opportunity, and I will touch upon it when we talk about evaluation of today's meeting in just a second. But just to remind you all that at our next meeting on the 6th of November, we will be critically looking at those school inspections over the last sort of 12, 18 months, depends when they occur and when we're able to really scrutinise them, because there's a period of time when a school gets the finalised report, validated report. So we're looking at Gelli Log, our pupil referral unit and GOITRA. Okay, so that's at the next meeting. And we're also looking at the Welsh Education Strategic Plan. Lots of acronyms for our new guys, but I know how experienced you are, so I'm sure you know a lot of them anyway, but we commonly call it the WESP. All right, so that's what we're looking at next time. Sorry, that's what we're looking at on the 6th of November, the inspections. On the 11th is the WESP, and also the RAS strategy. So another nice acronym for you, but this is raising aspirations, raising standards, and this is really what we've embedded across the authority and across our schools, and so we'll evaluate that then on the 11th as well. Agenda item number 6 is the Scrutiny Forward Work Programme, so it's just a reminder of that and a reminder of some of the workshops towards the bottom. Now I know my colleagues who are undertaking the MAT Task and Finish group, you guys are meeting on the 19th via Teams. My lead colleague there is our Jeff, and then we have got another Task and Finish group which will commence in the spring, which will be led by our colleague Claire, who had to leave us unfortunately, and that will be considering food waste in schools. And then we will have a visit to the college where we just want to get to know the college a bit better. If you haven't already had the pleasure of being there, but really getting to know the team, a learning walk, and also understanding that transition, because we're a tertiary model in Merthyr Tydfil. It's understanding that transition from our year 11s over to the college and their futures. Okay. Agenda item number 7 is scrutiny referrals. I have none. Agenda item number 8 is report recommendations. And as I reminded colleagues last week in our pre-meet, did the committee address the recommendations in the report, and how did scrutiny add value? Well, as always, I think we did. But again, you've never let me down, Anna.
To make comment in regards to the forward work programme. I did push my button, but I've not been having much luck with my button today.
No, fire away, Anna. Which part of it?
Just to clarify, obviously Sue mentioned earlier that we'd look at that impact on school budgets in a later meeting. I'm assuming that's going to be part of the RAS strategy report.
No, it won't. You've just preempted me. I'll just conclude on my recommendations from today's, and then we'll talk about when that's the most opportune moment for it. But thank you, Anna. I've got that noted. So, okay, so going on to the recommendations from today and really evaluating and scrutiny adding value. As I said, you all asked some really pertinent questions. Some of the key things that I picked up on were 2 areas where officers will actually include the conversation on 6.3 in the first report from Lawrence regarding the highlighted paragraph, the strengthening of that paragraph from officers for cabinet. And then Anna, coming on to your point with regards to the budget agreed. So as I said, at the moment, you know, we haven't got anything set in stone. So it's twofold really, coming to your point, Anna. One is we need to consider in the forward work programme, more than likely next year for evaluation, just because the period of time. So at some point we'll need to evaluate the impact of the budget decision, this year's budget decision, okay? And then following on then is picking up on further evaluation of it with regards to specific areas. So, excuse me, get my teeth in. Physical resource, i.e. teachers, etc. It's going to be bigger than, you know, just 1 or 2 areas. So we may have to pick it up in 2 sessions, may do a workshop on it even. But it'll be impact on physical resource, i.e. teachers, learning assistants, etc. And then the impact on RAS strategy, raising aspirations, raising standards. So what impact did it have on achievement, if any, obviously, because we're surmising at the moment. But what impact did it have on class sizes? I think one of my colleagues mentioned that there. You know, there's a number of things we need to consider, but we have to give it a little bit of time, okay? So we will need to make a note of that, and it is likely that that will form part of our next forward work programme, but we can always touch upon it anyway, as we do in every meeting. Yeah, jump in.
Thanks. Yeah, just to clarify, because it was specifically about attainment, and Sue's comment was that that will be coming back to this committee at the end of the year, which I took to be in relation to the RAS strategy prior to a report going to council in January.
Yeah, but that's not on the impact of the budget. So what I'm saying is that's one part of it, which is the RAS strategy, which we'll have, but we do need to evaluate the impact on that reduction of the budget as well. So it's twofold. That's what I'm saying to you. So we'll have that in, I think the scrutiny report will be, I want to say March. Can we double check? Because I haven't got it in front of me now. So we'll have it when we evaluate the RAS strategy on the 11th of December. And then we'll pick it up again. Bear with me. There we go. I've got it in front of me now. We can pick it up again when we talk about the attendance report on the 4th of March, because these are all sort of golden threads through it, Anna, you know, and they all have an impact. So we can pick it up on there. What I'm saying is we will need an actual whole scrutiny session, really. I don't think we'll be able to have another agenda item, because it'll be, you know, quite detailed on impact and evaluating what those budget reductions have meant to our schools and to the services that we have. So we need to include that as well. So I'm just making sort of a mental note and a physical note about that as well. So we'll do that. We'll do it in the next meeting on the 11th, where it's agendaed under RAS strategy, and then we'll actually include it in next year's forward work programme as early as possible as well. So we need to keep an eye on it really through that calendar of time. Okay. Colleagues, did you have any other, apologies. I also made a note that regarding the triple RS, that, you know, we'll try and get those governor reports. Okay. And also, bear with me, we've already mentioned it just in the last one then, the governors to take part when we're talking about community focused schools as well. Okay. Has anybody got any other comments in relation to today's discussions, questions and observations? Jeff, and then Clive, did you want to make a comment as well? No, you're okay. Jeff.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point that was raised, and it was just raised in abstract form really, but it seems to me that I appreciate that much of the nitty gritty of the work of schools and education comes down to head teacher and the SMT. I get that. Mm-hmm. But it does seem to me, just from what was said, that governors are being left out of some of this stuff. Now, I'm not saying governors would be willing to be included, but I do think that governors certainly should have more of an impact, have more knowledge of when stuff is coming through and what it needs to be done, and they should be involved more. Now, I'm not a governor anymore, but several of my colleagues are, and it's important that they understand that which is being said, because at the end of the day, the schools are managed by the governors along with head teachers. Yeah, so it's important that they're included. And at the moment, I just feel this is just general apathy that governors are not being included. So perhaps we could look at that over the next period of time, just to see that this is not happening. And if it is happening, could we bring it to the forward work programme at some point, where we discuss it and ask the specific questions? How can governors be more involved?
Okay. I'll give you my observations, and then I'm going to be brutally frank with you, as I always am. I'm a governor at Ysgol y Graig, and I'm a governor at Cyfartha Juniors as well. I have to say we have been engaged both on community focused schools, and obviously we have different committees then for attendance and finance, as you all do if you're governors as well. So I have to speak up for those two schools and say that, you know, they've done a good job there in engaging us. Now, when I'm saying I'm going to be brutally frank, has that been the same when the shoe is on the other foot? Not necessarily so. And I think that our officers who have always been involved with schools and governors, etc., have really, you know, sometimes been trying so hard to get governors to come to meetings or take part in learning walks and you know, I completely appreciate the governors have jobs to do and other lives, etc. as well. That's always been a bit of a sticky issue for us, you know, if I'm completely honest. And so I think what we may find is there are some schools which are endeavouring to engage and some really proactive governors, and then there are some which perhaps just aren't engaged enough. And I think if I'm reminding myself now, I'm trying to think of the year, but when Gary was in charge of, he still is, isn't he? No, no, this is how far I'm going back now. No, governing bodies, attendance at governing bodies, and governors and the makeup of governors. We did look at this, I think, back about 3 years ago, you know, and try to change the way we recruit governors, which I believe now is still an ongoing meeting, isn't it, with the cabinet members involved, etc. To really get, you know, a robust governing body within our schools and people who really can give the time to participate. So I think there's two ways of looking at it, Jeff, if I'm honest. I think your point is very valid about, are they being told enough information? And I think at some juncture, that's an opportunity for us to pick up on that. I mean, we may want to do a workshop on governing bodies and just become a little bit more familiar and up to speed on where we're at with it. So that is something for consideration. I think our scrutinies between now and April are pretty chock-a-block. So, you know, if we can, maybe we'll consider it as a workshop and follow it up from there.
We've got a dearth of experience on this scrutiny committee. Gareth is a chair. Lawrence is a chair. I'm sorry if I've missed other people out. There are other people that are on the governing bodies, all with wealth of experience that could help in this. And this inability to recruit the right governors, if I can put it so crudely, is definitely holding this education of our children back. And then the officers, despite their wanting to involve governors, wouldn't have anywhere to go if the governing body wasn't involved. So that's our first port of call. But I mean, Lawrence has been doing it more than anybody. You're a governor, you've been doing it. I can think that's blame you all. But the truth of the matter is, we really need to set ourselves the task, or we need somebody to set the task of finding responsible, no, I'll take that word back, finding governors who would be willing and able to support the school in the way that we would wish them to do so.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I would be happy to share with you that I think we're on that right path now because of the recruitment process, and only because in the last number of years as your previous cabinet member, I was involved in that recruitment stage, and I know that has carried on, you know. So I think I can give you some element of warmth, if you like, that is actually happening. But I think it goes back to the valid point that you had about that engagement and making sure that governors are engaged. We could have a great governor as well, but you know, are they getting the information, you know, around community focused schools and things like that? It's those areas, isn't it, that we need to touch upon as well. Lawrence.
Yeah, just to sort of elaborate it slightly, because I know where Jeff is coming from, and I know exactly what you said as well is very pertinent. But there is a little bit more to it than that, in the sense of, in terms of governance, I think there is, and Andrea May obviously is doing a lot of good work as well in terms of it. I think she did mention governance in her report. But I think there could be merit in looking at how, if you like, the confidence of governing bodies is understood across the borough, because depending where you are and depending who's on the governing bodies, as I say, the more experienced people are better aware then of the perhaps responsibilities and maybe be perhaps assertive in what their expectations are. Whereas it would appear that perhaps that isn't the case across a lot of the governing bodies, because some of the sessions that I attend, that when I hear other governors speaking regarding their experiences in the governing bodies, I do find it a bit mind-boggling, I've got to be honest. So I can understand why there's the training and such like at sometimes is offered. Whereas perhaps it's not appealing to some of us who've done lots of training. So there does seem to be a gulf of how the partnership working does work with schools between the senior management teams and governors, and do they really know what the capabilities are? It's confidence. It is all about confidence and knowing that confidence. Like councillors probably are very confident in the governing bodies, but there are others who are not and do not realise, if you like, the potential that they got, to be frank, and they do rely then on individuals within their governing bodies to guide them, and perhaps they're not having the guidance, and perhaps is the right way.
Yeah, no, I echo that, and I think that some of the best governor engagement that I've had is where we've had those cluster governor meetings as well. You know, you've got to see other governors from other schools and you learn from each other then as well, don't you? And I think perhaps we just need to see a little bit more of that. And as I said, we can pick that up maybe in a workshop then at a future date later on next year. Okay. So last but not least then, item number 9, feedback on scrutiny activities. Well, I reminded us about those task and finish groups that we have and the forthcoming site visit to the college. So we'll update you on that as and when that is actually booked. Item number 10, any of the business deemed urgent by the chair? Well, I have none. So diolch eto. Thanks again for your contributions today. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to our new colleagues as well for coming along, you know, and I shall see you at the next pre-meeting and the next scrutiny, if not before. Thanks again, guys. Enjoy the rest of the evening.